They told you this was a failure. They handed you a timeline when you were young enough to believe it. By 30, find her. By 35, lock it in. By 40, if you're still alone, something went wrong. Something broke. Something inside you wasn't enough. That was the story. That was the cage they built around your identity before you were old enough to question the blueprints. But here's what they never told you. The men walking into their 40s are single, unbothered, and quietly powerful. They're not broken. They're not bitter. Studies out of Michigan State University, longitudinal research tracking thousands of adults over decades, have found something that contradicts every assumption modern culture made about solitary men. Single men over 40, particularly those who chose intentional solitude over desperate coupling, report measurably higher life satisfaction, lower chronic stress, and stronger personal identity than men who spent their 30s chasing a social script they never actually wrote. The world told you that was the finish line. The data says it might be the starting gun. So before you spend one more hour feeling like you lost a race nobody asked you to enter, you need to hear what's actually happening inside these men. Because the truth isn't just that they're happy, the truth is why. And that is why it is going to shatter something in you that needed shattering a long time ago. The myth that was always a leash. You were taught that a man's life gains meaning through attachment, that you are incomplete alone, that solitude is something to be endured, escaped, filled as quickly as possible with noise, with bodies, with obligation. This belief didn't come from biology. It didn't come from philosophy. It came from systems that needed you to manage. A man with no anchor is a man who asks difficult questions. A man with no anchor has no monthly liability, no social performance to maintain, no identity tied to someone else's approval. He is, in the language of control, a loose variable. So they pathologized him. They called him commitment phobic, emotionally unavailable, a man who couldn't settle down, as though settling were a virtue instead of a warning sign. Think about the language. Settle down, as though your natural state is too turbulent, too alive, too sovereign. Settle down. Most men swallowed that language. They used it to shame themselves into choices they weren't ready for, with people they hadn't chosen clearly. And then, 10 years later, they sat in mediocre living rooms feeling vaguely imprisoned, unable to name the sentence they were serving or the crime they supposedly committed. The man who resisted, who refused to settle because he could feel the difference between genuine desire and social pressure, he was told he had a problem. But the research tells a different story. His cortisol is lower, his purpose is clearer, his life measurably is his own. The compound interest of solitude. Here is the principle most men never learn because they spend their 30s running from the lesson. Solitude, when chosen rather than endured, functions like compound interest in the self. Every year you spend alone, truly alone, not waiting, not performing loneliness for sympathy, but actively building, you are depositing into an account most men never open. You learn your own patterns without the distortion of another person's emotional weather. You learn what you actually want for dinner, what wakes you at 3 in the morning, what makes your chest expand with something that feels like purpose. You learn the architecture of your own mind. Men who never experienced this, who moved from parents to college relationships to marriage without a single season of sovereign solitude, carry a strange fragility. They can't be alone for a weekend without reaching for stimulation. They've never met themselves. They've only ever been a role in someone else's story. The man over 40 who has lived alone with intention is not starving. He is full in a way that terrifies people who are empty in company. He has built a relationship with himself so substantial that he doesn't need to beg the world for validation anymore. He's already given himself the verdict. This is not arrogance. This is architecture. Why the grief was never about her. You may have loved someone. You may have lost someone. Maybe not once. Maybe 3 times, 4 times, in 4 different versions of yourself that no longer exist. And there was grief. Real grief. The kind that restructures your brain chemistry, that makes you drive past apartments you used to share, that makes certain songs into weapons. But here is the ruthless truth most men never allow themselves to examine. The grief was rarely just about her. It was about the identity you attached to the relationship. The man who was loved, chosen, validated by someone whose opinion he had decided mattered most. When the relationship ended, that identity died. And that death, not her absence, but the collapse of a self you had constructed around her presence, that is what hollowed you out. Men who understand this become dangerous, not to others, to limitations. Because if your suffering was identity-based rather than love-based, then your healing is also identity-based. You don't need someone new. You need a new architecture of self, one that doesn't require external confirmation to stand, one that isn't one conversation away from structural collapse. The men who rebuild this way, who grieve consciously, who understand what actually died and what needed to die, they emerge at 40, not smaller. They emerge clarified, like steel that went into fire and came out with all the impurities burned away. The social script was written by people who feared you. Let's be precise about something. The timeline you were handed, relationship, marriage, children by a certain age, or you've failed. Who benefits from your compliance with that script? Examine it with cold eyes. The economy benefits. Consumer culture is built around the nuclear unit. The pharmaceutical industry benefits. Chronic stress disorders spike in men trapped in incompatible relationships. The therapy industry benefits. The court system benefits. None of this means relationships are bad. Some are extraordinary. Some men find a partner who doesn't diminish them and they flourish together. That exists. Honor it where it exists. But the pressure, the cultural shame applied to men who haven't followed the timeline, that pressure serves systems, not men. And once you see that, once you understand that your discomfort with your own solitude was largely installed by institutions that profit from your compliance, the shame begins to dissolve. Not because you've rationalized something, because you've seen through something. The powerful man doesn't live in a story written by people who needed him predictable. He writes his own terms, he moves in his own time, and he does not apologize for the silence other people find uncomfortable. What the happiest men over 40 actually have in common. The research is specific. It is not enough to be alone. Intentional solitude without direction becomes stagnation. The men who thrive, who score highest in subjective well-being, who report the deepest sense of meaning, share a profile that has nothing to do with relationship status and everything to do with psychological architecture. They have a craft, something they have pursued long enough that they've developed real skill, not a hobby for distraction, a discipline that demands something from them and returns mastery. They have a body they respect, not aesthetically, functionally. They move, they train, they sleep, they eat with intention, not because they're performing health for someone else's approval, because they understand that the mind lives inside the body, and a neglected body is a compromised mind. They have chosen their relationships surgically, a handful of people whose company deepens them rather than draining them. They do not maintain relationships out of obligation or fear. They maintain them out of genuine selection. And they have purpose that extends past themselves. A project, a mission, a cause, something that makes their individual life feel like a chapter in a larger story. This is perhaps the most significant predictor. Men who are living towards something are not available to be consumed by the emptiness that terrifies men who are living for someone else's approval. These are not accidents. These are architectures, built over years of choosing difficulty over comfort, clarity over company, depth over performance. The identity death. There is a version of you that needs to die before you can understand what this actually means. That version believes his worth is conditional. He believes that being chosen by someone makes him real, that without a witness to his life, life somehow counts for less. He checks his phone for confirmation that he matters. He adjusts his opinions in rooms where disapproval feels dangerous. He has spent years building a self that is entirely legible to other people, because he was terrified of what he would find if he built one that was legible only to himself. That man cannot walk through the door being described here. He will hear this and think it sounds like cope, like the philosophy of men who couldn't get what everyone else has. He will dismiss it because engaging with it seriously would require him to question the entire framework through which he has measured his own worth, and that is a demolition he is not ready for. Let him go, the man who can sit alone on a Tuesday night with no distraction, no performance, no audience, and feel not the anxiety of emptiness, but the quiet satisfaction of someone who has built something real inside himself. That man is not lonely. He is sovereign. He is not waiting to be chosen. He has already chosen himself, with full knowledge of his own contradictions, his failures, his capacity, and his direction. This is not the consolation prize. This is the prize people told you was impossible because they never found the door. The decade that rewrites everything. Your 40s, if you enter them without the weight of a life lived for external approval, become something most men never experience. They become yours, not in the adolescent sense of rebellion, not in the avoidant sense of running from commitment, in the earned sense. The sense that only comes after enough time spent testing yourself against reality and discovering that you are more capable than the scared version of you ever believed. Studies tracking male happiness across the lifespan consistently show a phenomenon called the U-curve of well-being, where happiness dips during the middle decades under the weight of obligation, performance, and social pressure, then rises again. But men who enter their 40s having already done the interior work, having already shed the identities they didn't choose, for them, the curve doesn't dip as far, and the rise is sharper. They don't need to recover from decades of performing someone else's idea of a good life. They arrive at 40 already in motion, already themselves. This is the proof the title promised you, not as a consolation, not as a coping mechanism, as a measurable, documented, replicable outcome of choosing authenticity over compliance before the culture gives you permission to. The conclusion most men will refuse. The world will not validate this path. Understand that clearly before you choose it. Your relatives will still ask the question at gatherings. Your colleagues will still read your solitude as sadness. Social media will still algorithmically reward the engagement photos and the milestone announcements. The machinery of social approval will not bend itself to accommodate your autonomous life. And that is exactly as it should be, because this path has always been self-selecting. The men who walk it are not the men who need the world to understand them. They are the men who got to a point, through pain, through clarity, through enough years of watching compliance fail the complaint, where they stopped requiring the world's comprehension as a precondition for their own peace. That is not hard. That is maturity of the rarest kind. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are not a cautionary tale wearing a human face. You are, if you choose to be, a man in the process of becoming precisely and uncompromisingly himself, at an age when most men are just beginning to understand what that would have been worth. The door. Most men who watch this will close the tab and return to a life that feels safer. They will take the emotional intensity of the last few minutes and discharge it back into their usual patterns. This is not a judgment. This is a pattern. But a few of you will sit with this. You will feel something shift, not because you were told something you didn't know, but because you were given language for something you already sensed and had been too surrounded by noise to articulate. If that's you, if you're the man who felt something true in this, then you already know the next step. It is not a subscription, it is not a program, it is a decision. A private, unwitnessed, non-performative decision to stop measuring your life by a ruler that was never calibrated for it. Make that decision, then build accordingly. Not everyone gets here, but those who do don't go back.